Hello there. I'm Noel Hacegaba, Deputy Executive Director of the Port of Long Beach. Welcome to Supply Chain Insight, where we explore the latest trends, issues, and news in the supply chain with top industry leaders, experts, and influencers. Our objective is to bring you the insight you need to help you keep your cargo moving. Today's business executives expect a lot from their supply chains: efficiency, velocity, flexibility, cost management, and operational excellence. Supply Chain Insight brings the supply chain to you, one segment at a time, to explore new approaches and innovative solutions that will help you and the Port of Long Beach deliver greater value to our customers and partners. And speaking of our partners, our special guest today is a longtime partner of the Port of Long Beach. He currently serves as Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy at the National Retail Federation. As NRF's primary spokesperson, he is responsible for representing the retail industry before Congress and the administration on issues such as supply chain, international trade, product safety, and customs-related issues that impact the retail industry. He has also been a leading advocate of the value of trade and global value chains to the U.S. economy. I have known him for over 10 years, and I can tell you he is extremely effective, and that is why I'm so glad to have Jon Gold as my guest today. Jon, welcome to Supply Chain Insight.
Hi, Noel. Good to see you.
Thanks for sharing your insights with us today. And let me start with a question I'm sure is on the minds of our viewers. What's the state of retail, and what is keeping you up at night these days?
Sure, thanks. And I think in general, the state of retail is good despite what's been going on over the past couple of years. The consumer is still in a very strong position. Household net worth has increased by $35 trillion since the first quarter of 2020, and the consumer saved in excess of $2.6 trillion during the pandemic. So with that, we've seen a $1 trillion shift in spending from consumers from services to goods over the course of the pandemic, which has resulted in a 14.1% growth in retail sales in 2021. So, we certainly believe there's going to be growing momentum in 2022 for another good year, to have another robust year in retail sales. Probably not as growth, probably not as strong as we saw last year. Things will start to slow down a little bit, but still looking at a good year in 2022. I mean, obviously there are still ongoing challenges with the economy, with inflation, the workforce issues, supply chain disruption issues, ongoing economic issues, and issues with Russia and China and how that impacts the global economy. So I still think we're still looking at a good year for 2022. However, the issues that are keeping me awake at night, I think, are the issues that are keeping my members awake at night. And it's the ongoing uncertainty of, what's going to happen in the supply chain, what's going to happen with COVID, and will we see another strain that's going to have an impact on the supply chain. We did a benchmarking survey of our members earlier this year, trying to identify what are the key issues they're looking at in 2022 and what do they think are the big challenges. And they continue to be port congestion, lack of capacity on vessel space, and worker shortages continue to be the main challenges they see on the supply chain. But the other overriding issue that they're paying very close attention to now is the upcoming West Coast labor negotiations, port labor negotiations. That contract is set to expire July 1, right at the heart of the peak shipping season. So members are paying very close attention and are starting to plan now for the what if scenarios.
Well, Jon, I mean, the numbers you shared with us are staggering. I mean, certainly here at the ports, the nation's largest gateway, we feel the effects of these historic numbers. But when you tally them up across the nation, you're talking about trillions of dollars. And clearly the pandemic has had an effect in that shift. Let me transition now to that. The pandemic had the effect of shifting consumer spending away from services to goods. How long do you think that will continue?
I think we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in spending on goods already. However, spending on goods still outpaces services. And I think part of that too is just the ongoing challenges that we're facing on the variant and the different rules and requirements in localities for what's required for mask mandates and everything else. So I think as consumers feel more comfortable, as more folks become vaccinated and feel better about being out and traveling and being in restaurants and sporting and everything like that, I think you'll start to see that change. But I think there are still ongoing challenges, with the inflation and how that impacts folks, everybody's spending. But I think you'll start to see some of that shifting back this year. Again, still uncertain what happens next. I think that's what everybody is looking forward to. But again, as you see the workforce issue with, more employees working from home, are they going to shift back to actually working in an office, and what impact does that have on the district where you're working? More consumers now are eating at home as opposed to eating out, for a variety of reasons. They think they're saving money by eating at home. They think they're eating a little bit healthier by eating at home. So all that has an impact on the goods and services spend.
John, and you're so right. With all the uncertainty ahead of us, a lot more questions than answers. But the good news for you and your members is here in the nation's largest port complex. Our workforce has stepped up. They've masked up. They've showed up to work every single day. Haven't had to shut down the port a single day. Tribute to our workforce. Going back to these trends that were either induced or accelerated by the pandemic, another trend was the increase in e-commerce. Many brick and mortar retailers adjusted their distribution channels to accommodate e-commerce growth. Is this something that you expect to continue to see in 2022? And if so, what could this mean for import shipping in your mind?
Yeah. So first of all, Noel, I failed to recognize the great work that the supply chain stakeholders, the longshoremen, management, what they've been doing together to handle the challenge we've been facing at the ports. It certainly has been beyond anything anybody could have expected. But the fact that the workforce has stepped up and has been doing this despite the significant challenges that we face, we certainly applaud that, and the continued partnership that they've engaged with management to address these issues as they come, I think has been fantastic. We certainly hope that continues as things progress. But back to your question on specific to e-commerce, despite the focus on e-commerce, a lot of folks are still shopping in brick and mortar. In 2021, brick and mortar spending actually grew faster than e-commerce. I think that e-commerce spend jumped up in 2020 as stores were forced to shut down because they were deemed non-essential, as customers, individuals stayed home. But retailers certainly shifted to address the economic realities of what they were facing with things like buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup. Those, for many retailers, they hadn't planned on doing that for a couple of years, but retailers had to pivot to adjust to the current situation. So you saw more and more stores, bringing that into place. Certainly, multi-channel sales are the fastest growing channel for retailers, and these shifts are due to the consumer demand. So right now, the consumers are still shopping heavily in channels that involve stores. So stores still are a significant part of the retail ecosystem.
John, I'm going to now turn the attention on another topic that you raised earlier, and it's on everyone's line of sight, and that is inflation. How concerned are you and your members about inflation and the possible impact on supply chain and imports?
Yeah, I mean, inflation certainly is a challenge for retailers, particularly to see the cost for energy, gas, and rent all go up and detract from how consumers are spending, where they're spending more on that as opposed to retail. Inflation might not lead to a reduction in spending, especially to see wages inflate at the same time. However, the way to think about inflation is that consumers will continue to spend what they budget for items, which is based on their earnings. They may get less for their money, but the money spent will be the same or more if wages are increasing at the same time. So inflation leads to a reduction in the value of what you get for your dollar, not necessarily in the reduction of the dollars spent. So spending on retail goods might be impacted by inflation in essential items, but I think it's something that everybody's paying very close attention to and trying to get a better understanding on what that impact is going to be. But obviously, in addition to inflation, you're seeing general rising costs for everything it takes to make and move a product, from the raw materials to the transportation to the workforce. So you're seeing a lot of costs that are impacting the inflation as well. But it's an ongoing challenge, certainly something that my members are paying a lot of attention to and trying to understand what the ultimate impact is going to be on the consumer as well.
Yeah, I appreciate your views and your insight on that, John. It's something that we here at the Port of Long Beach are keeping a close eye on as well. And obviously, looking out for how the general increase overall in prices could impact demand for imports. But appreciate your insight, something you and I will continue to talk about in the months ahead. Speaking of the months ahead, what is your outlook for the retail sector for the rest of this year in 2022?
I mean, I think we're still looking at a good year for retail. Despite all the ongoing challenges that we've faced, I think retailers are still looking at a good year for 2022. I think we're confident that retail sales, overall economy remains in good shape. But there are things that could happen that we just don't know about. Certain policy decisions that could compound challenges that the economy is already facing. We certainly hope that's not the case, but we certainly know that anything could happen. But I think in general, retailers remain positive on their outlook for this year, but they still have challenges they've got to face. Again, I hate to keep coming back to this, but the workforce continues to be a major challenge for attracting and retaining workers, not just in retail, but just in general across the board. As we're looking at what to expect for this year, we actually have an event coming up on March 15th, which will be our second annual State of Retail and Consumer event, where we're going to be exploring the health of the American consumer and key behavior trends during the pandemic and get a better understanding of what to expect. We're also going to announce our 2022 annual retail sales forecast at that event as well. Yeah. So we'll have better insight for you next month on what we're actually expecting for the year.
Thanks for that, John. And I'm sure our viewers are going to be interested in following that update that you provide. Sticking to retail for a sec, I think everyone would agree that the crystal ball, even before the pandemic, was not very reliable. And so a lot of forecasting techniques and methods that were not as reliable before the pandemic have been rendered even less reliable. But in light of everything you just summarized, what are your thoughts on retail forecasting and how that relates to the upcoming peak season? What are you hearing from your members, and what do you think the retail sector in general is doing as it relates to forecasting?
Yeah, forecasting remains to be a challenge. It was a challenge before the pandemic and remains even more of a challenge now, especially as you see the ongoing continued growth and trying to get a good handle on what the consumer wants and expects and how they want it remains to be a challenge. But I think retailers throughout the pandemic have really spent a lot of time looking internally on how to get better forecasting, better data, working with their partners as well, trying to get a better understanding of what's happening. And that certainly has been one of the areas where retailers are really focused on, is that relationships, both internal and external, making sure that everybody is fully aware of what to expect and how to execute on whatever plans you have coming down the pike. We have our global port tracker that comes out every month talking about the container volumes we expect. We're still looking at increases throughout the year, not the double-digit levels we were seeing last year, but still looking at single-digit increases throughout 2022. I think we'll, have a clearer forecast in a couple of months, but as of right now, through the first half of 2022, we're still expecting, single-digit increases, month-on-month growth throughout the year. So, we saw record volumes last year, as you guys are well aware. 26 million TEUs coming through the ports that we're tracking. That's the highest we've ever seen. And it continues to be a challenge. How do we address that? How do we make sure that we have fluidity and transparency to move those container volumes, so we can get out of the congestion, not just today, but looking at the future, and really provide more resiliency into the system, which is just definitely needed.
Yeah, very well put, John. As I like to tell folks, forecasting today is even more of an art than a science. And as we all try to work together on getting the best way to forecast what's coming, we all benefit from that, but appreciate your insight on that. Well, John, I really appreciate your time with us today, and your insights are always very well appreciated and always on point. And we will certainly track this event that's coming up. You want to mention the upcoming event again to the viewing audience?
Sure. It is March 15th. It's our State of the Retail, State of the Consumer event. Noel will make sure we share the information with you. And we're also proud to announce that we have a new supply chain event coming up in June, our Supply Chain 360 event that is going to take a look at both supply chain operations, technology, and sustainability, which we think are all critical in this time.
Well, thanks for that, John, and we look forward to both events. Well, John, thanks again for joining me today and sharing your insights. To our valued audience, thanks again for joining us. We'll see you again soon for another episode of Supply Chain Insight, brought to you by the Port of Choice, the Port of Long Beach.